The iron bars cast shadows across Martha Brennan's face as she stood in the drafty courthouse hallway, watching the man she loved being led away in chains for a crime he did not commit. It was April of 1878 in Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, and justice had failed them both in the cruelest way imaginable. Martha pressed her palm against the cold wall to steady herself, her other hand clutching the worn leather Bible her mother had given her before passing. James Brennan, her husband of only 8 months, had been convicted of cattle rustling and the murder of rancher Thomas Whitmore. The evidence had been circumstantial at best, manufactured at worst, but the jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a guilty verdict. 20 years in the territorial prison at Laramie, 20 years of their lives stolen by lies. She had watched James's face as the sentence was read, seen the way his jaw tightened and his green eyes had found hers across the crowded courtroom. He had not spoken, had not protested, but in that moment of silent communication between them, Martha had made a promise to herself and to him. She would wait. She would fight. She would never stop believing in his innocence. The marshal, a heavy-set man named Cordell who had never liked James, roughly guided her husband down the courthouse steps. Martha followed, her modest blue calico dress catching on the splintered wood. She was 22 years old, and the future she had imagined, the ranch they were building together, the children they had dreamed of, all of it was crumbling like dust between her fingers. "Martha," James called out, turning despite Cordell's grip on his arm. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and even in chains, even facing 2 decades of imprisonment, he stood tall. "Martha, you listen to me now. You go on and live your life. Do not wait for me. You are young, and you deserve happiness." "No," she said firmly, moving closer despite Cordell's warning glare. "I made vows to you, James Brennan. For better or worse, I will find a way to prove your innocence. I swear it." "There is no way," he said, and she heard the break in his voice. The witness testimony was too strong. That cowboy, whoever he was, he lied straight to the jury's faces, and they believed him over me. Martha reached out and gripped his shackled hands. "Then I will find the truth. I will make them see. However long it takes." Cordell pulled James away then, loading him into the prison wagon with 2 other convicted men. Martha stood in the street watching until the wagon disappeared into the spring afternoon, carrying with it the only man she had ever loved. The days that followed were the darkest of Martha's life. She returned to their small ranch on the outskirts of Silver Creek, to the half-finished cabin James had been building, to the empty bed and the silence that pressed against her like a physical weight. The townspeople whispered when she walked by, some with pity, others with judgment. The wife of a murderer and a thief. She held her head high and ignored them all. She wrote to James twice a week, long letters full of news about the ranch, about the mare that had foaled, about the garden she was planting. She told him about her determination to find evidence of his innocence, though she did not yet know where to begin. His responses were infrequent, the handwriting cramped and careful, the words measured. He always ended with the same plea: let me go, move on, find happiness. She never once considered it. 3 months after the trial, Martha rode into town for supplies. The general store was owned by Harold Kemp, a gruff but fair man who had always treated her with respect. As she selected flour and coffee beans, she overheard 2 men talking near the front counter. "Whitmore's boy is running the ranch now," one of them said. "Doing a fine job of it too, from what I hear." "That whole business with Brennan was ugly," the other replied, "though I suppose justice was served. Can't have men thinking they can steal cattle and kill a rancher without consequences." Martha's hands stilled on the bag of cornmeal she had been examining. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to not react. But as she carried her purchases to the counter, a thought struck her. Thomas Whitmore's son, Robert, had inherited everything when his father died. The ranch, the cattle, the land. What if there was more to this than a simple case of cattle rustling gone wrong? She paid for her supplies and walked out into the bright June sunshine, her mind working through possibilities. James had insisted he was innocent, that he had been at their ranch the entire night of the murder. But the prosecution had produced a witness, a drifting cowboy named Sam Fletcher, who swore he had seen James near the Whitmore property that night, had seen him with a running iron, and had heard the gunshot that killed Thomas Whitmore. Martha had never believed Fletcher's testimony. The man had appeared out of nowhere, testified, collected what she suspected was a reward from the Whitmore family, and disappeared again just as quickly. She had tried to tell the defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who seemed more interested in finishing the trial than in fighting for James, but he had dismissed her concerns. Now, standing in the street with the sun warming her face, Martha made a decision. She would find Sam Fletcher. She would learn the truth. And she would bring that truth back to Silver Creek, no matter what it took. The search proved more difficult than she had anticipated. Sam Fletcher was a common enough name, and drifting cowboys rarely left clear trails. Martha spent her days working the ranch, tending to the few head of cattle they owned, repairing fences, doing the work of 2 people. In the evening, she wrote letters to town marshals, to ranch foremen, to anyone who might have heard of or seen a man matching Fletcher's description. Months passed with no results. Summer turned to autumn, and autumn gave way to a bitter Wyoming winter. Martha learned to split wood and mend tack, to shoe horses and deliver calves. She learned to be alone, though she was never lonely, not truly. James was with her in every chore she completed, in every improvement she made to their land. This was for both of them, for the future they would have when she cleared his name. In January of 1879, nearly a year after James's conviction, Martha received a response to one of her letters. A town marshal in Cheyenne wrote that a man named Sam Fletcher had been arrested there for cheating at cards. He was currently being held in the city jail awaiting trial. The marshal's letter was brief and impersonal, but to Martha it was a beacon of hope in the darkness. She packed a small bag, saddled her strongest horse, and rode out the next morning despite the frozen ground and the threat of snow in the air. Cheyenne was a 3-day ride from Silver Creek, longer in winter conditions, but Martha did not hesitate. She had waited this long. She could endure a few more days. The journey tested her resolve. The temperature dropped below freezing every night, and she huddled close to small fires wrapped in every blanket she had brought. Her horse was steady and sure-footed, a bay gelding named Rusty that James had trained himself. She talked to the animal as they traveled, her voice the only sound in the vast, snow-dusted landscape. Cheyenne was a sprawling, bustling city compared to Silver Creek. Martha arrived on a gray afternoon, her face chapped from the wind, her body aching from days in the saddle. She found a modest boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who offered her a room and a hot meal without asking too many questions. The next morning, Martha presented herself at the city jail. The deputy on duty, a young man with a skeptical expression, listened to her request to speak with Sam Fletcher. "What business do you have with him?" the deputy asked. "He testified at my husband's trial," Martha said, keeping her voice steady. "I believe his testimony was false. I want to speak with him." The deputy studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "5 minutes, and I will be right outside the cell." Sam Fletcher was a wiry man in his 40s with greasy hair and a face marked by years of hard living. He looked up when Martha entered the cell area, his eyes narrowing with recognition. "I know you," he said. "You were at that trial in Silver Creek, Brennan's wife." "Yes," Martha said, standing as tall as she could, "and you lied on that witness stand. My husband is innocent, and you helped send him to prison for a crime he did not commit." Fletcher laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You got no proof of that. I told the truth as I saw it." "You told the story someone paid you to tell," Martha said. "How much did the Whitmore family give you? Enough to make it worth destroying an innocent man's life?" Something flickered in Fletcher's eyes, but he shook his head. "I do not know what you're talking about, lady. Now get out of here. I got nothing to say to you." Martha left the jail frustrated, but not defeated. Fletcher had reacted to her accusation about the Whitmore family. It was subtle, but it was there. She was on the right track. She spent the next several days in Cheyenne asking questions, visiting saloons and gambling houses, piecing together information about Sam Fletcher. She learned that he was indeed a drifter, that he had a reputation for being willing to do unsavory jobs for the right price. She learned that he had left Silver Creek shortly after the trial with enough money to spend weeks drinking and gambling before ending up in jail in Cheyenne. But she needed more than circumstantial evidence and rumors. She needed proof. Or better yet, she needed Fletcher to confess. And she had no idea how to make that happen. The answer came from an unexpected source. On her 6th day in Cheyenne, as she sat in the boarding house parlor trying to formulate a plan, another guest arrived. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and weather-beaten, with sandy hair and blue eyes that held both intelligence and kindness. He introduced himself as Daniel Cole, a cowboy who worked various ranches throughout Wyoming and Colorado. Mrs. Chen served them both coffee, and Martha found herself drawn into conversation with Daniel. There was something easy about talking to him, something genuine in the way he listened. When he asked what had brought her to Cheyenne, she found herself telling him the entire story. James's arrest, the false testimony, her search for Sam Fletcher, her desperate need to clear her husband's name. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as she spoke. When she finished, he set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. "I might be able to help you," he said quietly. "I knew Thomas Whitmore. Worked for him for a season about 5 years back. He was not an easy man, but he was honest in his business dealings. His son Robert, though, he was different. Always looking for shortcuts. Always wanting more than he had earned." Martha's heart began to race. "Do you think Robert could have been involved in his father's death?" "I do not know," Daniel said. "But I know that Thomas and Robert argued constantly about how the ranch was run. Thomas was old-fashioned, wanted to build slowly and carefully. Robert wanted to expand fast, to take risks. And I know that Robert inherited everything when Thomas died." "But why would Robert frame James?" Martha asked. They barely knew each other. "Your husband's ranch borders the Whitmore property, does it not?" Daniel asked. When Martha nodded, he continued. "That land includes water rights to Clearwater Creek. Thomas Whitmore always respected those rights. But I heard rumors that Robert wanted to buy your husband out. Wanted that water access for his expansion plans. If your husband was in prison, unable to work the land, unable to pay property taxes, eventually that land would go up for auction." Martha felt cold despite the warmth of the parlor. It made terrible sense. Robert Whitmore had not just inherited his father's ranch. He had taken it, she was suddenly certain, by murdering Thomas and framing James for the crime. Sam Fletcher had been paid to provide false testimony to place James at the scene. "But how do we prove any of this, Schieffermecker?" she asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Fletcher is facing charges for cheating at cards. The penalty for that is not severe, maybe a few months in jail, maybe just a fine. But if he were facing more serious charges, if he thought he might spend years in prison, he might be willing to make a deal. He might be willing to testify against whoever paid him to lie." "What kind of serious charges?" Martha asked. Daniel met her eyes. "Accessory to murder. If Fletcher knew that Robert Whitmore killed Thomas and helped frame your husband for it, that makes him an accessory. That could put him away for a long time. If the prosecutor knew about this possibility, he might be willing to offer Fletcher a deal in exchange for testimony against Robert." "But we would need evidence to convince the prosecutor," Martha said. Daniel nodded slowly. "Then we need to go to Silver Creek. We need to investigate Robert Whitmore, see what we can find. And we need to do it carefully, because if Robert is guilty of murder, he will not hesitate to protect himself." Martha looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to say. "Why are you willing to help me? You do not know me. You do not know James." Daniel's expression softened. because what you are doing takes more courage than I have seen in most men, let alone a woman alone in the world, because your husband is innocent and deserves justice, and because it is the right thing to do." Something shifted in Martha's chest, a warmth she had not felt in months. Gratitude, yes, but something else too. Something she immediately pushed away. She was a married woman. She loved James. But she could not deny that Daniel Cole's presence made her feel less alone than she had in a very long time. They left Cheyenne the next morning, riding together back toward Silver Creek. The journey was easier with a companion, the long silences comfortable rather than lonely. Daniel told her about his life as a drifting cowboy, moving from ranch to ranch, never staying in one place too long. He had been born in Missouri, had come west after the war, had spent the last dozen years working cattle from Texas to Montana. "Have you never wanted to settle down?" Martha asked as they made camp on the second night. "To have a place of your own?" Daniel poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise into the dark sky. "I suppose I have never found a good enough reason to stop moving, never found a place that felt like it wanted me to stay." "That sounds lonely," Martha said softly. He looked at her then, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "It has been. But I chose it. You did not choose your loneliness, and yet you bear it with more grace than I have ever managed." Martha felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the darkness that hid her reaction. "I am not graceful. I am just stubborn. I made a promise to James, and I will keep it." "That is not stubbornness," Daniel said. "That is love. Your husband is a lucky man." The words should have brought her comfort, but instead they brought confusion. She did love James. She had never stopped loving him. But sitting here by the fire with Daniel, feeling safe and understood in a way she had not felt since James was taken from her, she wondered if it was possible to hold two truths at the same time. She could love her husband and also feel something for the man who had chosen to help her when no one else would. She said nothing, just pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders and listened to the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of coyotes. They arrived in Silver Creek in late January, nearly 2 weeks after Martha had first left in search of Fletcher. The town looked exactly as she had left it, the wooden buildings weathered and familiar, the main street rutted with frozen mud. They went first to Martha's ranch, where Daniel helped her tend to the animals and check on the property. Then they began the careful work of investigating Robert Whitmore. It was slow and frustrating. They could not ask questions directly without arousing suspicion, so they listened in saloons and at the general store, pieced together information from casual conversations. They learned that Robert had indeed expanded the Whitmore ranch significantly, that he had purchased several neighboring properties and increased his herd substantially. They learned that he had hired new ranch hands, men with hard faces and reputations for violence rather than honest work. Weeks passed, and Martha began to fear they would never find the evidence they needed. She continued to write to James, though she did not tell him about Daniel or about their investigation. She did not want to give him false hope, not until she had something concrete. Daniel stayed on at the ranch, sleeping in the small barn, helping with the daily work. He was good with the horses, patient and skilled, and Martha found herself relying on him more than she had expected. They worked side by side during the days, and in the evenings they sat by the fire in the cabin and talked. He told her stories about his travels, and she told him about her childhood in Kansas, about meeting James at a church social, about the dreams they had shared for their future. "You will have that future," Daniel said one evening in early March. "We will find the proof we need. I promise you that." Martha looked at him across the firelight, at this man who had given up months of his life to help her, who asked for nothing in return. "Why are you still here, Daniel? You could have gone back to your drifting life weeks ago." He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because I have never met anyone like you, Martha Brennan, because your strength and your loyalty make me want to be a better man, because somewhere along the way helping you stopped being just the right thing to do and became the most important thing in my world." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Martha's heart was pounding, her mind a chaos of conflicting emotions. "Daniel, I am a married woman. I love my husband." "I know," he said, "I know that. And I would never ask you to betray your vows or your heart, but I needed you to know the truth. I needed you to understand why I am still here, why I will stay until James is free and you have your life back." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Daniel said gently. "Your devotion to James is part of what makes you who you are. I would not want you to be different, even if being different meant you could care for me the way I have come to care for you." They did not speak of it again, but something had shifted between them. The awareness was always there now, an undercurrent to every conversation, every shared task. Martha tried to focus on the investigation, on her mission to free James, but she could not deny the growing affection she felt for Daniel. It was different from what she felt for James, less passionate perhaps, but deeper in some ways, built on shared struggle and mutual respect. The breakthrough came in mid-March, more than a year after James's conviction. Daniel had ridden into town to pick up supplies, and while at the general store he had overheard two of Robert Whitmore's ranch hands talking. They had been drinking, their voices loud and careless, and they had spoken about something that happened the night Thomas Whitmore died. Daniel came back to the ranch riding hard, his face flushed with excitement. "Martha, I heard something." Two of Whitmore's men were talking about the night of the murder. One of them said something about Robert paying them to keep quiet about seeing him ride out that night. He said it was worth it because Robert paid them well, but he was getting nervous because Fletcher had been arrested in Cheyenne. Martha grabbed Daniel's arm. "Did they say anything else? Anything specific?" One of them mentioned a meeting, said Robert was planning to pay Fletcher more money to stay quiet, that he was going to meet him at an old line shack on the north edge of the Whitmore property tomorrow night. Martha's mind raced. This was it. This was the opportunity they needed. If we could hear what they say at that meeting, if we could get Robert to admit what he did, we would have our proof. Daniel nodded. "It is dangerous. If Robert realizes we are there, if things go wrong." "I know," Martha said, "but we have to try. We may never get another chance like this." They spent the next day preparing. Daniel rode to the telegraph office in town and sent a wire to the marshal in Cheyenne, explaining the situation and asking him to bring Sam Fletcher to Silver Creek. It was a gamble, but if they could confront Fletcher with Robert's confession, if they could pressure him with the threat of accessory charges, he might break. That night, Martha and Daniel rode out to the Whitmore property. The line shack was a small, dilapidated structure used by ranch hands during roundups. It sat at the base of a rocky hill surrounded by scrub brush and scattered pines. Martha and Daniel tethered their horses some distance away and approached on foot, moving carefully through the darkness. They positioned themselves behind a large boulder near the shack, close enough to hear but hidden from view. The night was cold and clear, the moon nearly full, casting silvery light across the landscape. Martha could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Daniel's warmth beside her as they waited. Footsteps approached, and then Robert Whitmore appeared, a tall man in his 30s, with his father's strong features, but without his father's character. He entered the shack, and a few minutes later, another figure arrived. In the moonlight, Martha recognized Sam Fletcher. Their voices carried through the thin walls of the shack. Martha and Daniel pressed closer, straining to hear. "I do not like this," Fletcher was saying. "I do not like that I was arrested. What if they start asking questions about that trial in Silver Creek?" "They will not," Robert said. "You were arrested for card cheating, nothing more. Just keep your mouth shut and everything will be fine." "You said this would be easy money," Fletcher said. "You said I would testify, collect my payment, and that would be the end of it. But now I got lawmen looking at me, and I'm starting to think maybe I should have kept my mouth shut entirely." "You will keep your mouth shut now," Robert said, and there was a dangerous edge to his voice. "Or do I need to remind you what happens to men who do not keep their word to me?" "You cannot threaten me," Fletcher said, but his voice lacked conviction. I could go to the law right now, tell them everything. Tell them how you killed your own father and paid me to say I saw Brennan do it." "But you will not," Robert said coldly, "because if you do, if you go down too. You were part of this, Fletcher. You helped frame an innocent man. You think any jury would go easy on you? No, you will take this money and you will disappear, and you will never speak of this again." There was the sound of coins clinking, and then Fletcher spoke again. "This is not enough. Not for keeping quiet about murder. I want double this amount." Robert laughed, a harsh sound. "You are not in a position to negotiate. Take what I am offering or take your chances with the law. Your choice." Martha looked at Daniel, her eyes wide. They had it. They had Robert's confession, spoken in his own words, but they needed more. They needed witnesses. They needed this to be official. Daniel seemed to have the same thought. He pulled out his pistol, checking that it was loaded, and whispered, "Stay here. I am going to circle around, come at them from the front. When I call out, you run for the horses and ride for the marshal." "No," Martha whispered urgently. "It is too dangerous. Robert might be armed." "We do not have a choice," Daniel said. "This is our chance. Trust me." Before Martha could protest further, Daniel was moving, circling wide around the shack. Martha's heart hammered in her chest as she watched him disappear into the shadows. She counted the seconds, each one an eternity. Then Daniel's voice rang out strong and clear. "Robert Whitmore, Sam Fletcher, come out with your hands where I can see them. You are both under arrest for murder and conspiracy." There was a moment of shocked silence, and then chaos erupted. Fletcher came stumbling out of the shack, his hands raised, his face pale in the moonlight. But Robert appeared in the doorway with a gun drawn, his expression twisted with rage. "Who are you?" Robert shouted. "You have no authority here." "My authority comes from the truth," Daniel said calmly, his own weapon trained on Robert. "I heard everything you said in there, how you killed your father, how you paid Fletcher to frame James Brennan. It is over, Whitmore." Robert's gun swung toward Daniel, and Martha did not think, did not hesitate. She stepped out from behind the boulder, her voice cutting through the night. "Do not do it, Robert. There are witnesses. The marshal is on his way. If you shoot him, you will hang for certain." Robert's head whipped toward her, and for a terrible moment Martha thought he might shoot anyway. But then they heard the sound of horses approaching, multiple riders, and the voice of Marshal Cordell calling out, "What's going on here? Somebody better start explaining, and fast." The marshal from Cheyenne had arrived, and with him were 2 deputies and a very nervous-looking Sam Fletcher handcuffed between them. Apparently Daniel's telegram had been received and acted upon more quickly than they had hoped. Everything happened quickly after that. Martha and Daniel told their story, explaining how they had overheard Robert's confession. Fletcher, faced with the choice between hanging as an accessory to murder or testifying against Robert, broke down and admitted everything. Robert Whitmore had killed his own father in a dispute over the ranch's future, had seen an opportunity to also eliminate James Brennan and take his land, and had paid Fletcher handsomely to provide false testimony. Robert was arrested that night. Fletcher, in exchange for his testimony, received a reduced sentence, and Martha, standing in the cold March darkness with Daniel beside her, felt the weight of a year's worth of struggle finally begin to lift from her shoulders. The legal proceedings took time. A new trial had to be arranged, evidence presented, testimonies heard. But in May of 1879, more than a year after his conviction, James Brennan's name was officially cleared. He was released from the territorial prison and returned to Silver Creek a free man. Martha was waiting at the train station when he arrived. She had not seen him in over a year, had carried his memory with her through every dark day and sleepless night. When he stepped down from the train, thinner than she remembered, but still himself, still her James, she ran to him. Their embrace was fierce and desperate. A year's worth of longing and fear poured into that single moment. James held her tightly, his face buried in her hair, and she felt him shaking with emotion. "You did it," he whispered against her ear. "You actually did it." "Martha, how did you do it?" "I had help," she said, and when she pulled back to look at him, her eyes found Daniel standing a respectful distance away. "James, there is someone you need to meet. Someone I owe everything to." Daniel approached slowly, and Martha saw the way James studied him and the way understanding dawned in her husband's eyes. James extended his hand, and Daniel shook it firmly. "Daniel Cole," Martha said. "He is the one who helped me find the truth. Without him, you would still be in prison." "Then I owe you a debt I can never repay," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for bringing my wife through this safely. Thank you for believing in my innocence." "Your wife is the strongest person I have ever met," Daniel said quietly. "She never gave up on you, not for a single day." The three of them stood there in the afternoon sunlight, and Martha felt the full weight of the complicated emotions she had been carrying. She loved James, had never stopped loving him, but she also cared deeply for Daniel. It was a truth she would have to carry, a private acknowledgement of what might have been in a different world, a different life. That evening back at the ranch, Martha prepared a proper meal for the first time in over a year. James walked the property marveling at everything Martha had maintained in his absence, at the repairs she had made, the improvements she had managed despite being alone. Daniel had offered to leave, to ride out, and return to his drifting life, but James had insisted he stay for supper. They sat at the small table in the cabin, the three of them, and talked late into the night. James wanted to know everything, every detail of the investigation, every moment of the journey that had led to his freedom. Martha told him most of it, though she left out the more personal moments, the confessions shared by firelight. When the meal was finished, Daniel stood to leave. "I will be heading out in the morning," he said. "There is a ranch up in Montana that is hiring for the summer season. I figure it is time I move on." Martha felt a sharp pain in her chest, but she nodded. This was how it had to be. Daniel could not stay here, not with the feelings that existed between them. It would not be fair to any of them. James walked Daniel outside, and through the cabin window Martha saw the two men talking, saw James grip Daniel's shoulder in a gesture of gratitude and respect. When James came back inside, his expression was thoughtful. "He is in love with you," James said quietly. It was not an accusation, just a statement of fact. Martha felt tears spring to her eyes. "I never, James. I never betrayed you. I never broke my vows." "I know," James said, crossing to her and taking her hands in his. "Martha, I know. I can see it in the way he looks at you, and I can see in the way you look at him that you care for him too. But I also see that you chose me, that you fought for me, that you kept your promise." "I love you," Martha said, the tears spilling over now. "I have always loved you, but Daniel, he was there when I had no one. He helped me when I was alone. I do care for him, James. I cannot lie about that." James pulled her into his arms, holding her as she wept. "I do not blame you for that. How could I? You thought I would be gone for 20 years. You were alone and hurting, and he helped you. That does not diminish what we have. If anything, it makes your loyalty to me mean even more." They held each other for a long time, rebuilding the connection that had been strained by distance and time and complicated circumstances. Martha knew it would take time to fully heal, to find their way back to each other, but she also knew they would manage it. They had survived the worst. They could survive anything. Daniel left the next morning before sunrise. Martha did not go out to say goodbye. She could not. Instead, she stood at the window and watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared into the dawn light. A part of her heart went with him, but the larger part remained here, with James, with the life they would rebuild together. The months that followed were a time of healing and renewal. James slowly regained the weight he had lost, and color returned to his face. They worked the ranch together, falling back into old rhythms, creating new ones. The townspeople who had judged Martha so harshly were now quick to praise her loyalty and determination. Robert Whitmore was hanged for his father's murder, and the Whitmore Ranch was sold to pay his debts. James bought some of the land at auction, the land that Robert had killed for, the water rights that had sparked this entire tragedy. Martha wrote to Daniel once, care of the ranch in Montana where he had said he would be working. She thanked him again for everything he had done, told him that she and James were doing well, that they were happy. She wished him a good life and all the joy he deserved. She did not expect a response, and none came. It was better that way. A clean break, a closed chapter. By the winter of 1880, nearly 2 years after James's wrongful conviction, life had settled into something peaceful and good. Martha discovered she was expecting their first child, and the joy that news brought felt like a final healing, a symbol of the future they had fought so hard to reclaim. One snowy evening in December, as they sat by the fire, James, reading aloud from the newspaper while Martha worked on tiny clothes for the baby, there was a knock at the door. James answered it, and Martha heard a familiar voice that made her heart skip. "I hope I am not intruding," Daniel Cole said. "I was passing through the territory and wanted to see how you folks were doing." James welcomed him in with genuine warmth, and Martha rose to greet him, acutely aware of her rounded belly, of the visible evidence of the life she and James were building. Daniel's eyes went to her stomach, and something flickered across his face, quickly masked by a smile. "Congratulations," he said softly. "That is wonderful news." They invited him to stay for supper, and he accepted. The conversation was easier than Martha had feared, the old camaraderie still present despite the complicated history. Daniel told them about his travels, about the ranches he had worked, the places he had seen. He seemed lighter somehow, more settled in himself. "I have been thinking," Daniel said as the evening drew to a close, "about what you said once, Martha, about finding a place that wanted me to stay. I think maybe I'm ready to stop drifting. There's a small ranch for sale about 20 miles south of here. Good land, good water. I was thinking of putting in an offer." Martha felt a complicated mix of emotions, but the dominant one was happiness. "I think that is a wonderful idea," she said. "You deserve a home, Daniel. You deserve to put down roots." "I would like that," James added. "I would like to have you as a neighbor, to have a friend nearby. You saved my life and my wife's future. I would be honored to have you close." Daniel's expression was unguarded, vulnerable in a way Martha had rarely seen. "I would like that too. Very much." He did buy that ranch, and he did become their neighbor and friend. Over the years that followed, he became part of their family in a way, always welcome at their table, always ready to help when help was needed. He courted and eventually married a school teacher named Elizabeth, who came to Silver Creek in 1882, a kind woman with a quick laugh and a gentle spirit. Martha and Elizabeth became close friends, and watching Daniel with his wife, seeing the genuine affection between them, Martha felt the last of her complicated feelings settle into something peaceful. James and Martha had 4 children eventually, 2 boys and 2 girls. Their first was a boy they named Thomas, after no one in particular, just a name they both liked. The ranch prospered, and Silver Creek grew from a rough territorial town into a proper community. The story of how Martha had fought to clear her husband's name became local legend, told and retold until it took on mythic proportions. But for Martha, the truth was simpler and more profound than any legend. She had made a promise to the man she loved, and she had kept it. She had waited years for justice to arrive, and when it had not come on its own, she had gone out and seized it with both hands. His name had been cleared eventually by the Cowboy's testimony, but it had been her determination that made that testimony possible. Years later, when Martha was an old woman sitting on her porch watching her grandchildren play in the yard, Elizabeth Cole came to visit. Daniel had passed the previous winter peacefully in his sleep, and Elizabeth was preparing to move east to live with her daughter. "He loved you, you know," Elizabeth said quietly as they sat together. "He told me about it before we were married. He said he needed me to know that his heart had belonged to someone else first, and that if I could not accept that, he would understand. Martha looked at her friend, at this woman who had been part of her life for so many years. And you married him anyway. I did, Elizabeth said with a gentle smile, because he also told me that loving you had taught him how to love properly, that you had shown him what loyalty and strength looked like. He said that you could never be his, but that knowing you had made him a better man, and he wanted to be that better man for me. Tears rolled down Martha's weathered cheeks. He was a good man. He saved everything that mattered to me. And you saved him too, Elizabeth said. You gave him purpose when he had been drifting. You showed him what it meant to fight for something. He built a good life here because of you. They sat in comfortable silence, two old women who had shared a piece of the same story, who had both loved and been loved by good men, who had built lives worth living in this hard, beautiful land. James joined them on the porch, moving slowly with the aid of a cane, his hair white but his eyes still bright. He settled into his chair with a contented sigh and reached for Martha's hand, their fingers intertwining with the practiced ease of 50 years together. What are you two talking about? He asked. Old times, Martha said. Old friends, old blessings. James squeezed her hand and smiled. We have been blessed indeed, he said. More than we deserved, perhaps. Martha thought about that night in the courthouse hallway so many years ago when she had watched James being led away in chains and had made a promise to herself. She thought about the long, lonely year of fighting for his freedom, about Daniel's unexpected arrival in her life, about Sam Fletcher's testimony that had finally cleared James's name. She thought about the children they had raised, the land they had built together, the community they had helped create. No, she said softly. We earned every bit of it. We earned it with faith and patience and refusing to give up when everything seemed lost. We earned it by holding on to each other and holding on to hope. James raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You earned it, my brave Martha. I just benefited from your courage. We earned it together, Martha insisted, all of us. You and me and Daniel and Elizabeth and everyone who helped along the way. Justice did arrive, James. It took years, but it arrived, and we built something beautiful from those ashes. As the sun set over the Wyoming hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Martha Brennan sat surrounded by the life she had fought so hard to preserve. Her husband beside her, her friend nearby, her family thriving, her land secure. His name had been cleared eventually by the Cowboy's testimony, and she had waited years for justice to arrive. But in the waiting and the fighting, in the determination and the hope, she had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. She had discovered that love was not just a feeling but a choice, made again and again in the face of impossible odds. And she had learned that sometimes the journey to justice was just as important as the destination, because it was in that journey that she had become fully herself,